I am and I express the universe's love to everyone I encounter. So, you all know that I'm a statistic and data junkie. So, I'm going to read 5 statistics for you. I always read them because I want to make sure I get them correct. And then I'm going to comment on what I believe leadership is in relation to these statistics. 58% of managers said they didn't receive any management training. 58%. A recent study by careerbuilder.com, most managers in the workforce were promoted because they were good at what they did and not necessarily good at making the people around them better. The statistic obviously unveils a harsh reality. We have a bunch of leaders who aren't trained on how to lead. I can't wait to talk about that statistic. 58% of employees said they trust strangers. They trust strangers more than they trust their own boss. And that's from Harvard Business Review. 78% of people who quit their jobs cite lack of appreciation as their reason for leaving. People don't leave companies, they leave bosses. Number 4, American workers forfeited nearly 50% of their paid vacation in 2017, and nearly 10% take no vacation days at all. According to a study by Glassdoor, the fear of falling behind is the number one reason people aren't using their vacation time. And that's so much more true today in COVID-19 than it is, when we're in our normal, whatever that is. And then it says 53% of Americans are currently unhappy at work. So based on these statistics, let's talk about leadership in the workplace and the world. After all, the workplace is simply a microcosm of the world we live in today, right? It's a reflection of what's going on outside the workspace. So, 58% of managers said they didn't receive any management training. That statistic does not surprise me at all, because one of the things that I get called to do in organizations is to help develop leaders, because they've done something like, oh, Cheryl, you're great at sales. Great. We'll make you a manager. Ta-da. But you can't do that, because what happens is you go from this peer level, right, where you're peers and you're struggling together, and then all of a sudden somebody gets promoted and there's no transition. And what happens is that, this is why we get toxic leaders, because they're not prepared, they're not educated, and just because they're a good salesperson doesn't mean they're a good manager. Doesn't mean they can be. Absolutely. I think everybody has the potential to be a great leader if they're given the right tools. And this is like taking them from, I can't think of any other phrase than from the frying pan into the fire, right? So I'm using sales because I was in sales for a very, very long time. I know what it's like to meet quotas, to meet budget, to, what your bonus is based on. If I did great at that, doesn't mean I'm necessarily great at managing a group of people. I may be great at managing myself, which is clear because I've made my budget, I've done whatever, but it doesn't mean that I'm good at dealing with people problems. And that's what you have to do as a manager. You go from managing yourself to managing a group of people. There's a certain finesse and dynamic and skill set that you need to develop in order to do that. From what I've experienced, there are several key qualities of a good leader. So the first one is integrity. Now that's thrown around a lot, but I'll give it to you in my definition. It's doing what you say you're going to do, but only 100% of the time. And what do I mean by that? Integrity is choosing what's right over what's easy. It's not, okay, let's use what's top of mind right now. It's not saying Black Lives Matter in the public eye, and then in the confines of your business, you're treating people of color and Black people and minorities like garbage. That is out of alignment of integrity, right? It's instead of getting defensive when one of your people gives you feedback, it's sitting back, being open, and asking yourself if you need to course correct. So that's a second quality. It's being humble enough. And humility is so important that Harvard added a class on humility to its executive education program. And humility is not, it's not about being soft. It's about being open to what you're vulnerable at, meaning, okay, here's another great quality, and I'll use that to tie into humility. So I'm working with a group of very high level leaders, right, who have been conditioned to believe that empathy, which is another great quality of leadership, is all about crying at work. Okay. They believe that empathy in this context is being soft. And when I got to the point where I was able to explain that empathy is not that at all, it's being able to step into somebody's shoes, view what's going on from their lens or as close to their lens as possible, because we can't possibly experience what people are experiencing outside of ourselves. Can't do it. You know, we can get close, but we can't get exactly there. But it's stepping into their shoes, viewing the situation from their point of view, and seeing if you can sympathize and understand what they're feeling and why they're behaving the way they are. That's empathy. I think another quality of a great leader is ownership and accountability. It is saying, I made a mistake, I apologize, here's what I'm doing to course correct, and then taking that action. So we've talked about integrity, humility, accountability, empathy, the ability to foster trust, meaning, like, let's go back to that statistic. 58%, this is Harvard Business Review, 58% of employees say they trust strangers more than their own boss. I think that goes back to a problem of being transparent. You know, when I'm working with corporations and organizations, I always say to them, be as transparent as possible up until the point of liability. Obviously, in healthcare organizations, we can't violate HIPAA, we can't do any of those things. But if we're making a strategic shift, you can explain the why you're thinking that way, and get people on board with that, you know, without violating HIPAA, without doing all of those things. So, you know, another great quality of leadership is transparency. And then, you know, owning your own strengths and weaknesses. One of the things I say to my clients all the time is mistakes can be forgiven, but cover-ups can't. Mistakes can be forgiven, cover-ups can't. Everybody makes a mistake. And, you know, let's go back to Black Lives Matter and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Part of the big holdup or the things that paralyze leaders is that, oh my God, I'm going to make a mistake. I can't talk about this because I'll say the wrong thing. Well, guess what? Everybody makes mistakes. We all do. And if you have people around you that love you and care for you enough, they're going to accept your apology and help lift you up, you know, from that mistake. They're not going to, you know, kick you between the eyes. And I think part of not being transparent and part of, you know, hiding is one of the reasons why people don't trust their bosses. You know, I mean, you have to be open. You have to, as a leader, it's not a choice, it's a necessity. And then, of course, you know, I mean, none of these statistics surprised me. 79% of people who quit their jobs cite lack of appreciation. Well, the Pew Research Center did a study several years ago on employee engagement, and they said more than bonuses, more than salary bumps, more than vacations, employees that are engaged are the ones that feel appreciated. I did a program with a CEO whose turnover rate in his organization, and he had 200 employees. The turnover rate in his organization was 75%. So let me explain that to you. That meant that every several weeks or several months, those 200 people, 75% of them would quit and they'd have to replace them. Okay, so think about that in dollars and cents, like what the training, the retention, the payroll benefits, all of that come into play and how expensive that is. Well, when I sat down with him, he said to me, Kelly, we've got to do an employee engagement program. I've got this great program, and now this was a $15 million a year revenue wise organization. and he wanted to spend $250,000 on an employee engagement program that he thought would fix the problem. That was not the problem. The problem was that his employees were working in a medical facility and they didn't feel appreciated. So I said to him, I said, listen, we can do this. That's fine. But why don't we try something else first? Before you go and spend $250,000 on a program that we don't know that's going to work. Now, of course, the company that was selling this to them had all the statistics, and of course, right? But there's still that failure rate. So instead, what we did was I had him write handwritten thank you notes to the spouses of his employees every day. And he would come in, we got it down to a system where his executive assistant would handwrite the address and stamp them. So he would show up and he would have 2 envelopes on his desk, already stamped, already addressed. And he would sit down and write a sincere thank you note. Like, his assistant didn't know what he was writing. I didn't know what he was writing. It was from his heart to theirs. By the end of the year, so 12 months later, the attrition rate went down to 15%, and they made $20 million that year, not 15, by handwritten thank you notes. The only thing it cost him was postage, time, and ink from his ballpoint pen. But what it also did for him on a neurobiological level was it took him from going, oh my God, I've got 75% of my staff quitting, to, oh my God, look at all these amazing people that I have, and their spouses are the ones that are holding down the fort. And what the phenomenon that we didn't expect to happen was we had all these spouses that would be like, hey, it's 6:30 a.m. You have to be at work at 7:30. Let's go. You know what I mean? Now you've got their spouses holding them accountable to be on time. So absenteeism went down, and so did people showing up late for work, because now you don't only have their managers holding them accountable to the responsibilities they have to this organization. You've got husbands and wives and, significant others, which again was something we didn't expect. But I'll tell you, the holiday party that year was really cool to watch, because you had all of these people that this gentleman didn't know because he had been occupying the ivory tower for so long, coming up to him and thanking him for employing their spouse. So again, let's go back to community. He created this amazing community, not only with people that worked directly for him, but people that were hovering outside the organization. And another side effect of it was you had another almost army of people who were referring business to the organization. So now you've got an extended group of, like, let's call it an army of advocates for their business, who are like, hey, you need this done, this procedure done on your eyes, go there. They're awesome. My spouse works for them. So that's probably where that $5 million and over the budget came out of. And it was like, it's magic when you see these things happen, because they are that simple. Treat people the way you would want to be treated. Like, imagine what it's like to work for you. What would you expect from your leader? And then do that. What do I believe every leader should know about humanity before becoming a leader? Basically, that everybody's human. I mean, we're all the same on a, like, if you were to put our, and they did in the Genome Project, they put all of our DNA, they mapped all of our DNA and found that we are all the same. Like, we are all the same. And I think anything that you do to me, you're doing to you. Any action, any reaction, any punishment, any praise. Each person is part of this beautiful human family, this global family. And that while we all have unique gifts and talents that we bring to the table, there is this commonality at a very, basic level that we all share, and I think the other thing that comes to mind is that something that Byron Katie, who's one of my teachers, says all the time, and that there are no new stressful thoughts, that they're all recycled, and that we all share them. So think about that, on a humanity level. If there are no new stressful thoughts, they're all recycled, then we should be able to understand each other based on that. that human beings are just, we're weird, wacky creatures. We are, and there's beauty in that. But there are things that happen in our lives that also inform us. So while we are the same on that level, not all of us have had the same experiences. That's where that term unconscious bias comes up, and confirmation bias and all of that. It's what has happened to us throughout our lives to inform the decisions that we make. And I think, again, we're all the same. We have the same stressful thoughts, but we approach life differently. And I think one of the things that leaders need to know about humanity is, okay, hypothetically, you have a goal that you need to get to here, right? And you're here. Why does it matter how you get there, as long as you get there? Meaning, your tactics may be different from your director of marketing or your director of finance or whatever, but as long as you're all achieving the goal together, it doesn't matter what steps or strategies you take, as long as you get there and you get there together. I can also say this is what, I believe everybody needs to know about humanity. And I'll pull this because I just wrote a very long email to my team that is made up of 11 amazing humans from all over the world. That if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go further, go together. And to me, one of the great things about humanity, knowing what we've just talked about, that, we're all the same on a biological level, we've all got the same stressful thoughts, is that by giving each other hands up and lifting each other up, and maybe sometimes throwing an injured member, figuratively or literally, of your team on your back and carrying them for a while, it's so much more fun if you do it together. And it's so much more rewarding and fulfilling. When you're having a bad day, like my and the word beautiful is not, it's not fair on every level, because this person is so much more than that. I mean, you all don't see Cheryl sitting on the other side of the Zoom call who's directing me and scripting this. And I opened up this camera this morning to her and I said, I woke up in a bad mood, and she didn't judge me. She didn't try to fix it. She just held space, and sometimes as humans, as leaders, that's all you need to do. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to jump in with all these solutions. Sometimes people just need to be heard. And that goes back to that appreciation piece. See them, hear them, appreciate them. I do see fundamental personality traits in good leaders. Rolling up your sleeves and getting into the trenches, the proverbial trenches, when your team's struggling. It's that humility piece. It's not being afraid. Just because your title's CEO doesn't mean you can't get down and dirty with your team. I think another great fundamental trait of a leader is somebody who has built themselves from the ground up. So maybe they started as a receptionist and all of a sudden built themselves up to CEO. That's a great leader. Another fundamental personality trait that I absolutely love is the sense of humor, is being able to find the humor in it, and keeping things light when things get tough. Being honest and transparent to the point of, again, up into the point of liability, meaning like I said, in some healthcare organizations, you can't tell staff things because it's going to violate HIPAA, but you can tell them as much as possible without violating that. And I encourage you to talk to your corporate counsel about that, or HR, before you go ahead and start being transparent. The other fundamental trait of a great leader is being able to almost hover above your organization and see it from a 360-degree view, where you can kind of view the gaps and blind spots objectively instead of subjectively. And hiring people smarter than you, being able, and what do I mean by that? So I'll give you an example from my own business. I have an accountant, and I have a lawyer that's amazing. I'm not an accountant. I'm not strong at numbers. That's why, that team is there. And in my opinion, they're a great team. And then our attorney, I love attorneys. I know there's a lot of attorney jokes out there, but I believe that if you use attorneys properly, they will keep you out of court. And that's, as a business owner, you don't want to be in court. You want to be doing your work. So I think being able to recognize where your gaps and blind spots are, where somebody's strength is, to fill that gap and blind spot for the greater good of all concerned, and building a team from there. The other thing is, a fundamental trait of a good leader is knowing that CEO means chief reminding officer in my mind. And what do I mean by that? I mean that they constantly remind the team of why they're here and what they're trying to achieve, what the vision is, what the mission, vision, values is, and holding that as the team move. Like, again, they're like the rudder, right? So when people are going off course, it's, remember, our mission for this organization is to create a humane experience when it comes to medical procedures, or create a humane experience when it comes to the military, or big pharma, or things like that. And I'm not talking about coddling people like that. People make that mistake all the time when I say that, but it's not about that. It's about, holding people accountable to the best versions of themselves. And when they fall, helping them course correct without using shame. Shame is not a leadership tool, and it doesn't work. If you believe shaming your people is going to get them to do what you want to do, it may in the short term, but it's a terrible tool. So I think people who understand and connect and empathize and sympathize, and are also getting comfortable with discomfort. Meaning, let's go back to the George Floyd murder. It's caused a lot of conversation, and one of the things that I've come into the awareness of is that while I can study and read and educate myself about racism, my Black brothers and sisters are dying. And I have the privilege of being able to almost be a spectator to this tragedy. And it's wildly uncomfortable when I talk about it. But the more I talk about it, the more that discomfort dissipates, because it becomes part of my vocabulary and part of who I am as a leader. So, I think having those uncomfortable conversations and not being afraid to walk straight into the fire and come out and say, see, team, we walked through the fire. You're all fireproof. Did that hurt? Yeah, it hurt. Of course it hurt. But that fire burned off all the extra crap that was holding us back from being a great team. So I think another fundamental personality trait is not being afraid of being uncomfortable, because especially with the conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion that we're having now, especially for the white community that was responsible for building a lot of these things, that's an uncomfortable conversation. But it's not going to change until we need to start with the conversations. And I think it's a tie. I think it's a tie between Gandhi and Byron Katie. I mean, I'll take Gandhi first. I mean, I have a letter in my home office that he wrote to Hitler the night before World War II broke out. And he addresses it, dear friend, and ends it, dear friend. And, the fact that he was able to achieve what he achieved by nonviolence. I mean, to me, that, I'm getting a little bit choked up about it. I mean, he said, be the change you want to see in the world. And he was. It wasn't like, we go back to that integrity where it's not just talking about it. It's being it, it's embodying it and enacting it, and I think, again, going back, that's a fundamental trait of a great leader. It's not about just talking about it. It's embodying and enacting it, and then Byron Katie, man, she's unbelievable. I mean, and why do I love her? Because she is, no matter what somebody comes at her with, she's just the same. Steady, grounded, clear. I've had the privilege of meeting her twice, and she has these crystal blue eyes that don't look at you, they look into you. And what that does is it literally obliterates all the crap that's not who you are, the thoughts, the beliefs, the behaviors, the ego. She sees you. She sees all of you at your potential. Plus, I mean, the work is such a powerful tool, and I only recommend things that work, and it works. It is this way of inquiring into the stressful thoughts, beliefs, stories, narratives that you've built up through your life, and showing you where your responsibility is in a gentle way. I mean, that in itself is enough to make her my favorite leader. But and the other thing is, she's very funny. She's hilarious, which I love. I love a leader that can make you laugh. And she helps you laugh at yourself, but not in a judgy way. It's like, oh, okay, there I go again. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, that's my behavior. Yup. And it gets to the point where you're embracing it instead of resisting it, because they haven't done their introspective work. It's that simple. There are a lot that are operating here instead of from their heart space, from their soul space. I think there are too many leaders that are operating on the goal line instead of the soul line. Thank you, University of Santa Monica, for that analogy. Yeah, I think it's focusing too much on balance sheets and bottom lines and profit and loss versus looking at the human piece of it. And I think, we look at the crisis that the global community is going through with the coronavirus. And so the word crisis, the Greek root of that is to sift. And when this all started, I thought to myself, we're going to see the best and the worst of leadership. It's going to amplify the best and the worst. And it has. It really has. So I think that there are so many damaged leaders because they haven't taken the time to take a hard look at themselves. And when I say hard look, I don't mean shaming yourself or judging yourself. I mean saying, like, okay, I'll use myself as an example. I have a bad temper. I do. I get really enraged when I see injustice, and it makes me angry. That is something I know about myself. So I'm trying to take the steps to fix that through meditation, through educating myself. I mean, I just learned this year by reading a book that anger is a communication tool. I had no idea. I had no idea that that was a communication tool. Well, if you pull that tool out all the time, it loses its impact, right? So I know that about me. I know that things set me off. So I put the things in place, and try to look at the root of why things are triggering anger in me, in order to course correct. I don't think enough leaders do that. I don't think they take the time to look at themselves. I think before the big pause, or whatever you want to call coronavirus, we were moving at this warp speed, like more, faster with less, blah, 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 blah. And we didn't take the time to slow down and go, okay, I'm really pissed off by this email. Why is that triggering me? Why am I angry about that? It's not because nobody can do anything to you outside yourself. It's us doing it to ourselves, right? It's our minds. It's not them. It's how we're reacting to whatever behaviors, beliefs, situations are coming to us. I think also another reason these leaders are damaged is they're not taking care of themselves. I think everybody's process is unique and individual. So, be gentle with yourself, but take the time and take care of yourself, whatever that means. If it means once a week massages, do that. If it means a vegan diet, do that. If it means sleeping for 10 hours, do that. I mean, I have a client who told me that he worked for a 4-star general who every day would put on his schedule 7 hours of sleep, because he knew himself so much that he knew any less than that, he wouldn't show up at his best self. So ask yourself, as a leader, what's going to help me show up at my best? What inspired me to become a leader? Well, honestly, when I was in corporate, I kept getting pulled into these things, like these situations where I was called on to be a leader. And I, like, there were times when I would sit in these meetings, I go, why am I here? You like, what, I, you know, and it literally took one of my bosses saying to me, the CEO invited you because he wants you to rise up and be a leader. And I was like, oh, so it wasn't one of those things where it was like I was sitting, cross-legged on the floor chanting Om, and it was like, boom, I'm a leader. No, it happened organically, and I think with what we're dealing with now, let's use Black Lives Matter as an example. For years, I've been doing anti-racism work behind the scenes. I didn't talk about it. But then I started noticing, and I don't remember who I read the quote from, but basically she said, if you're complicit and you're not saying anything, then you're part of the problem. And I was like, shit. Well, I choose not to protest. Here's why. I've got a good friend that is a cancer survivor, and my husband is essential and has not stopped working. And I don't want to go out into a crowd and possibly pass it along and cause that problem. So what can I do? Well, I've got a captive audience in all of my channels, right? And I was not vocal on social media about Black Lives Matter. And then I knew when George Floyd was murdered, and I watched that tragic incident happen in front of my eyes, like many, that I couldn't be quiet anymore. Like I couldn't. Now, was I vocal in other ways? Yes, but not as publicly. And I believe that, like I said, being a leader means choosing what's courageous over what's easy, and it's easy for me to keep my mouth shut. It's easy for me to sit back and go, oh yeah, that's not my problem. It's easy for me to deny that I had white privilege. It's easy for me to deny that there's white supremacy. That's easy. Well, anybody can do easy, and I hold myself to a higher standard. Leaders are everywhere. It doesn't have to be somebody who's running a multi-billion-dollar multinational company. It could be somebody who's living under a tree on a blanket in LA that has just been released from prison. Okay, so what advice would I have for someone who is pursuing a career in leadership? Study yourself, know what triggers you, know what wounds and emotional baggage you bring to the table, and try to heal as much as that. Get yourself a support team, whether that's a coach or a psychiatrist or a therapist, a group of friends that are not afraid to tell you the truth, even when it's hard to tell you that. Understand that there is I believe leadership is on a spectrum as well. There's no one definition for leadership. I mean, and I can't remember her name. I can see her face, but she was that 14-year-old woman that went up in front of the UN to talk about environment. And she's a leader. Malala Yousafzai, leader. Study some of the great leaders, study some of the worst leaders. The leaders that I had in corporate taught me two things: who to be and who not to be. Study both. So my hope for leadership in the future is that we bring in more heart and soul-centered leaders, that the next generation obliterates unconscious bias and diversity, equity, inclusion. We truly have diverse, equitable, and inclusive cultures. My hope is that we have strong leaders who are willing to walk through the fire and show everybody else that not only are they fireproof, but the people around them are. My hope for the leaders of the future is that they continue to work on healing the collective consciousness, because I really believe we are so connected. And like, if COVID has taught us nothing else, that is it. We are so connected, right? And we're all vulnerable and we're all fragile, so the more you heal yourself, the tide raises, right? So it's a ripple effect. If I heal me, if I free me, then I'm inadvertently giving you permission to do the same, and we're all rising together. Yeah, I mean, that's what my hope is. And my hope is that So my hope for the leaders of the future is that um, they always choose love in the end. I am and I express the universe's love to everyone I encounter. I would say in closing, leadership equals love in all forms and all manifestations: mind, but self-love, external love, tough love. Leadership is love.